between them all. So when we heard this morning that the policy directions that were set for the police service would fall under the responsibility of the Ministry of National Security, but that because of our own remit as the Police Service Commission, we, as an example, the appraisal process we in the Police Service Commission are largely guided in that appraisal process by two things. One, the policy is set by the Ministry of National Security, but that same policy is mirrored in the strategic objectives of the police service. And we have had access to the strategic plan of the police service. Now, that process is important because if we are to do the monitoring function, we have to monitor the commissioner and the executive on the basis of the strategic objectives set out in his strategic plans, as well as his criteria for success on the different aspects of that plan, so that we don't see any inconsistency between the Ministry of National Security and the police strategic plan. Needless to say, there are other things over and beyond those policy directives that will form part of the appraisal process. So that again, moving forward for us is more a question of refining and taking advantage of the opportunities that we see coming out of the shortcomings between the constitutional remit and the institutional structure that we currently have. And we are here to provide, through our own strategic plan, options and avenues that we can use to move forward.
All right. Before Mr. Parker wind up, and we did make a commitment that we will be finishing. We started back early, and so that we could finish out early. Let me just run through, in terms of a review of some of the things we spoke about, and perhaps the way forward in moving what you spoke about. We spoke about legislative reform, and I gather there have been several suggestions of how we can address some of the issues regarding the appellate function and the appeals. We raised the issue of the selection of the process for the COP, the Commissioner of Police and Deputy Commissioner of Police. We'll mention the expansion of the remit of the PSC. Senator Ramkilawan mentioned some alternatives that we could look at, as well as others. We looked at the appraisal of the COP, and the PA mentioned that we should share the form or to have some discussion with with stakeholders on whatever we came up with, and that's for the medium to long term, and that the appraisal should be based on the strat plan, as Mr. Parker just mentioned. Talked a bit about perhaps some increased autonomy for the PSC on their new arrangement. DP emphasized that we at the Secretariat need to constantly let them know of requirements and needs. She also suggested with respect to consideration for remuneration for the appellate tribunal that a proper dossier has to be prepared. Chairman well represented the issue of relocation and why we should relocate, and the current conditions of the current accommodations. And he also said this morning that a review of the PSC is on the cards. But I want to draw your attention back to the first presentation by the chairman this morning, and the diagram that he calls the governance architecture. And perhaps as we move forward, we need to keep this diagram in mind, because it can act both as a compass and a timeline device, even though time is not here. at the end of it all, the work that we do really is in the interests of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And I have said elsewhere, and I would like to repeat it now, that the police service is the most important arm of the state. Why? Because when people decided to form a state, one of the liberties that they gave up was the right to take action against persons who do them wrong. And the state, therefore, is the guarantor of the security and safety of people. And the only arm of the state that has the power to carry arms officially and to arrest persons is the police service. And therefore, the police service is essential to the existence of the state. And the PSC and the Secretariat, the SCD and the Secretariat have been entrusted with a huge responsibility to ensure that the police service performs effectively and efficiently. And by extension, we have to perform efficiently and effectively. And to do that, we must have the proper resources and facilities to deliver on what is demanded of us in whatever form the constitutional remit can take. Thank you.
Let me piggyback a little bit on that entree by indicating that part and parcel of that same strategic development plan is the suggestion by the PSC that if indeed the architecture that we eventually come up with will allow us the capacity to access external grant financing, that will go a long way, a very, very long way, in moving us in the right direction of attempting to meet our remit in an independent way. Now, that external grant financing is nothing new and novel. What is new and novel is the direction in which this PSC is moving. It is, in a sense, there is no institution within the English-speaking Caribbean like this PSC by the remit of the Constitution. And so we have an opportunity here, an opportunity that can work in the interests of the Republic, as well as a shining example of where that guardianship of democracy can go. So again, I think the business of appealing to the possibility of external grant financing is something that is out there and available to all countries very much interested in moving along the lines of democratic governance on the one hand, and secondly, it will provide us with an opportunity not to replace the domestic financing requirements. That is a responsibility of the state, but certainly to complement it so that we can be able to move fast and effectively in ensuring that the remit that we are responsible for is fully carried out. Under the circumstances, before we wrap up, I would like to offer again the opportunity to any participants here to make any comments on what has been said earlier, what has currently been said, and any suggestion as we move forward. Yes, Mr. Hagel.
Co-chairs, I listened to the discussion today, and with the exception of the administrative reform for the Police Service Commission, I gather we are focusing a lot on legislative reform of the Police Service Commission. Not as a warning, but just as a pointer. We have to bear in mind that the current interlocking system for the police service ties the Commissioner of Police and the police service to the Police Service Commission. Changing one cog in the wheel will change the entire structure of the wheel. Therefore, are we here on a piecemeal reform only focusing on the Police Service Commission to the exclusion of the Police Service and the Commission of Police, because they are integrally tied up. We have to bear in mind that that constitutional structure, interference with one will have consequence to the other. We have to be careful, therefore, that we engage all the stakeholders in making the move for the reform, because we have to bear in mind it may have consequence on the very police service regulations, the powers of the Commission of Police, the powers of the Police Service Commission, and the operation and management of the entire police service. Mr. Parkhurst and Dr. Rai particularly has pointed out the significant position of the police service in the operation of the state. We cannot forget that. Police service is the agent, as it were here, a paramilitary agent of the state, crucial role for public safety and order. So we have in the, as it were, on the books now, a constitutional framework which comprises an interlocking system between the Police Service Commission, the DPA, and Police Service, and the Commissioner. So I just wanted to be clear that in this discussion, as we move forward for reform, we take into account the structure, this constitutional and regulatory structure that exists, and that we don't focus only, with all due respect to the Police Service Commission, only on the Commission, because a reform that interferes with the regulatory aspects of the Commission will have consequences for the Commissioner of Police and the Police Service, and by extension, if I may say so, all of us on the streets of Trinidad and Tobago. I just wanted to make that comment.
I think it's an extremely important and salient point, but it underlies the reasons why we have called for this roundtable session to start the discussion on what needs to be done. And that last point that you made really underpins and underlies the rationale for having this forum, so that we hope that as we move forward, those very issues can be fully explored and ventilated.
I just want to add a little bit to that by indicating that it's a blessing in disguise that we have the Police Service Commission operating within the context that we heard this morning, because that underscores the critical importance of the need for this kind of partnership that we've gathered here today, so that each of the major partners can recognize the interlocking responsibility that we have, one to the other, as we go forward. This is just the core areas of responsibility from a stakeholder standpoint that we are talking to and about the PSC this afternoon. Ours is a continuing task. We have had stakeholder discussions with the wider publics in Tobago. We intend to have it a little later on in the year in San Fernando, but we cannot move to the wider public's stakeholder discussions unless we have a very strong sense among ourselves as the major stakeholders as to where we are, what we are about, and where we are about to go. Dr. Rai is suggesting that he intends to get home early this afternoon, so he's asked me to move on to the next stage of particularly thanking all the major stakeholders here this afternoon for their patience, their understanding, their positive suggestions as we move forward. I don't want to pass up the opportunity of encouraging further dialogue, as we do have a couple minutes more, and because we have the opportunity to ventilate on some of the critical matters now. So again, before closing completely off, let me ask if there are any additional suggestions. Chairman, would you prefer at this point to? Anybody else, Commissioner? Under the yes,
Yeah.
yes, Mr.
At the next meeting, somewhere along the line as we go on, I think we should get an independent person who's constitutional criteria in the police service, that somebody independent overview the management perspective as we go forward. Maybe not at maybe the immediate consultation, but somewhere in the future, because I think we'd want to get the management mix of the interlocking system between the commission and the police correct. Perhaps in the next, or maybe further in the future as we go along to the constitution, consideration be given to bringing on board someone of that nature.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, through you, I'm happy that Mr. Harry Paul raised that point, because there's a link. I think the chairman mentioned earlier that we had the opportunity as a PSC to meet with the Prime Minister, who herself suggested that the next move, I mean, she made the commitment that the next move along this process would be a meeting with the Attorney General and the Ministry of National Security or their representatives in moving the process forward. Now, that also presents us as a PSC and that commitment for an opportunity to get somebody along the lines that you did mention with the requisite managerial skills at that level who can assist us as we move forward. I don't know, Mr. Chairman, if I'm talking out of turn. Okay, under those circumstances, let me thank you all again for coming and look forward to the next stage of our meetings as we move forward along this line of governance in the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you very much.